You know, we're in this stretch here. Good morning, by the way. Welcome to another edition of Take Five. We're in this stretch. Oh, I need my headphones. um, where it's it's a lot of the regulations, and it's hard to find things that are interesting to you. But what I'm going to try to do now is in each chapter find at least one thing I think will be interesting to you. And in Leviticus 15, I did find one, but we got to go all the way down to verse 19. It says, when a woman has her regular flow of blood, the impurity of her monthly period will last 7 days, and anyone who touches her will be unclean till evening. So, uh, I think that's something you can relate to, your monthly period. And I know it might sound weird me talking about it, but it talks about it here in the Bible. And one thing I want to point out is the Bible cares. God cares about every aspect of your life. You might think, well, what's God care about that for? He does, and we've seen that, and we've skipped a lot of stuff. But God cares if you got mold on your clothes. He cares about skin diseases. He cares if you're having some kind of discharge, and He cares about your period. Um, but the thing is, when a woman had her period back then, they were unclean. She couldn't go to church. That's how you look at it. Okay, unclean means she couldn't go to church. Basically, she had to stay home. It says 7 days. Well, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if that means 7 days after it's over or the whole thing is just 7 days. Usually, a period lasts about 5 days, so maybe it's just to give a couple extra days. But anybody who touches her, it says, will be unclean. All right, so she had to be kind of antisocial. Now, again, I'm not sure the reason for all that. Maybe they didn't have the different products we have now that keeps them clean. I know they didn't. So, verse 20: anything she lies on during her period will be unclean, and anything she sits on will be unclean. And again, probably just because they didn't have the products that we have now that do a really good job keeping clean. Verse 21, anyone who touches her bed will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening. Now, these folks are only going to be unclean for one day. She's unclean for 7 days. Verse 22, anyone who touches anything she sits on will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean till evening, whether it is the bed or anything she was sitting on. When anyone touches it, they will be unclean till evening. All right, verse 24, if a man has sexual relations with her and her monthly flow touches him, so her husband, goes into her and they have sex, it says he'll be unclean for 7 days. Any bed he lies on will be unclean. So he can't go to church either. So if you see Mr. and Mrs. Smith not at church, well, it's probably because she's on her period. All right. Verse 25, when a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time other than her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues beyond her period, she will be unclean as long as she has a discharge, just as in the days of her period. And for example, Lisa, before she had her hysterectomy, was having discharges for a lot of days. Well, if she lived back in those times, she couldn't have gone to church any of those times. So aren't you glad we don't live back in the times of the Jews? Any bed she lies on while her discharge continues will be unclean, as is her bed during her monthly period. And anything she sits on will be unclean as during her period. So any kind of discharge you treat just the same as the period, basically. Anyone who touches them will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water. They will be unclean till evening. When she is cleansed from her discharge, she must count off 7 days, and after that she will be ceremonially clean. On the 8th day she must take 2 doves or 2 young pigeons and bring them to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting. So when she finally, does her time, does her week, then she still got to make this offering. So 2 doves, just a couple birds here. Priest sacrifices one, and then for a sin offering and one for a burnt offering. In this way, he will make atonement for her before the Lord for the uncleanness of her discharge. And back then it was looked at as unclean. Like it is. You had to make atonement for it, kind of like a sin. It's not. We don't look at it that way anymore. Aren't you glad? Verse 31, you must keep the Israelites separate from things that make them unclean, so they will not die in their uncleanness for defiling my dwelling place, which is among them. That was basically it. God just didn't want his tabernacle defiled, and these are all things. There were so many things, not just with the woman's period, but we've already read a whole bunch of stuff. Verse 32, these are the regulations for a man with a discharge. Okay, we skipped some of it up there at the top. For anyone made unclean by the emission of semen. So a guy, we don't need to get into that. For the woman in her monthly period, for a man or woman with discharge, and for a man who has sexual relations with a woman who's ceremonially unclean. All right, that's all the regulations for it. And that's all we're going to look at today. I guess we'll be in chapter 16 next time. But I just thought I'm going to try to find things that are interesting, and I thought that you would find that kind of interesting. Anyway, we went along today. Wow. All right, see you next time on the next edition of Take 5.